Thank you for joining us today here on Winging It, Unscripted Conversations with the Hot Springs community, broadcasting from National Park College. The intent of this NPC podcast is to have informal conversations with different community members as a way of understanding their work in our region and highlighting their connection with the college. Welcome, listeners. I'm your host, Dr. Wade Derden, President of National Park College, and I'd like to thank my guest, Mr. Harry Porter, General Manager of the Sentinel-Record, for joining me today. This may be the first time we've met.
I believe
Harry.
it is. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to get to know you a little better today and to hear about your work at the Sentinel-Record. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So how about we start with a question just to begin our discussion. If you wouldn't mind, give us a brief history of the paper and then your time there.
Okay. Well, the Sentinel-Record has been around since 1877. A little bit of history. It is the last surviving. There have been 20 different newspapers in Hot Springs over the years.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and the Sentinel-Record is the lone survivor, so we're kind of proud of that. We've been around since 1877. We're owned by the Husman family, who also own the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Chattanooga Times-Free Press, the Jefferson City newspaper, the Northwest Arkansas paper, the Texarkana Gazette, the Camden Magnolia El Dorado paper. We also own all the cable links, cable operations throughout the country, so we're a pretty significant organization. The Sentinel-Record has been the paper of record here, as I said, since 1877. We have been tasked by the Husman family to prioritize local journalism. And I can tell you, I've been in the newspaper business for 30 years at various locations throughout the country. I tell my folks all the time, we are a unicorn in the newspaper business. Not many organizations prioritize journalism anymore. Most of them prioritize bottom line profit. We are fortunate enough that the Husman family prioritizes journalism above everything else. They pour resources into the newsroom, and they believe in local journalism to their core. Mr. Walter Husman has believed in that and led that fight for many years, and we're very proud of the newsroom and the journalism that we do for Hot Springs on a daily basis. It's guided by our sense of community, but it's also guided by the belief that without journalism, democracy does suffer. So we believe that what we do is important to not just the local powers that be, but also to the local community overall. And we feel we make a difference, and we try every day to do that.
I certainly appreciate that. In fact, I was going to ask you your thoughts on the importance of quality local reporting on our community. And we certainly appreciate the coverage that we get here. I mean, you're always at our board meetings and things like that. So we certainly appreciate that.
As I said, to the Husman family, journalism is a moral obligation. It's not just a job. And probably to a further degree, what we believe is, and there's lots of discussions on a national level about national news and national news organizations, and that's a completely different subject. But what we cover and what happens in the local community really on a day-to-day basis has more impact on people's lives than most anything that can go on a national level.
Right.
So it's very important to cover what we cover. We are the only organization in all of Hot Springs that employs journalists. There's nobody else employing journalists. Even though you may hear news through other avenues and outlets, we're the only ones that employ journalists. And we have 12 journalists in our newsroom. That is a significant newsroom for a paper of our size, I can tell you. Another organization that I worked at that had a paper of similar circulation had 6 people in their newsroom. So we really invest in local journalism. We believe in local journalism. We believe that it's important, and we strive every day to meet that obligation.
Well, you mentioned some of what the changes from sort of that national pressure, that national news cycle driving so much of the information we get. I guess I'd like your idea of how the news industry has changed in these last few years.
The news industry has changed a bunch. Not all news organizations, but a significant amount of news organizations are driven by, for lack of a better term, they're driven by the click. They're driven by, is this going to get the most interest, the most eyeballs, the most people engaged? And not to say that that's a bad thing necessarily, but you cannot let it lead your journalism. Journalism, by almost sheer definition, is just reporting the facts without any kind of agenda one way or the other. We do our best to do that every day. Some of our readers would say we fail at that sometimes,
Right.
but I can tell you the journalists at the Sentinel-Record, they do their best every day to report it without any sense of opinion one way or the other. It's gotten harder over the years. The newspaper industry has gotten a lot harder than it used to be just because of the sheer different choices people have to gather their attention.
Right.
So we took a step through Mr. Hussman's urging a few years ago. We kind of stopped with the normal print edition and went to a digital edition, and it's been very successful. We reach more people today than we have ever reached in the history of the Sentinel-Record. It's kind of funny. I'll be at a party or a social engagement, meeting new people, and they'll ask me where I work, and I tell them I work at the newspaper, and they go, oh, they get that, oh, that's probably a pretty tough gig. But when I start telling them we reach more people than we ever have before, and we do. On average, our website has 100,000 unique visitors every month from a variety of locations, not just local, but all across the world, really. So it is a challenge just from the sense of there's more competition than ever before for people's attention. But I think we do a decent job as far as what we cover, how we cover it, and how we present it to the public.
It's really interesting thinking just about that single innovation of the laptop. I resisted that. I'll just have you know, I was one of those people that was a holdout until finally I gave up and I went and signed up and I got my iPad, which I still have. And now I find myself, whenever I get the Sunday paper, an actual Sunday printed paper, I've already read the paper by that point.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh, I should tell them not to send this to me. It's really funny how that one single innovation has changed.
Right. And really the products are almost night and day different. With our digital replica, we embed videos, we cover a lot of things. We put interactive puzzles, we put special sections that are only found online. We have a lot more interconnectivity with the reader with our digital editions than we do with the print edition. If somebody uses, and I have conversations, especially when we first made the change, I had conversations with people, and I told them, I said, give us 2 weeks using the new one. And I said, I feel that after that 2 weeks, you won't want to go back to the old paper because you can make the type larger. It can read the paper to you. There's so many different options with the digital edition, and most people are resistant to change, and it's tough to change something you've been doing. Most of these people have been doing it for 50 or 60 years reading the newspaper. So it was a tough adjustment, but we've navigated it, and we still put out a few print editions, but people consume us by far more online than they have ever done in print.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, we have, I guess, an analogy on our campuses, textbooks. We increasingly have fewer physical textbooks on our campus.
Yes, that's very similar.
And it's the same thing. They can deliver content with video, and you can keep your notes on it and tag certain pages so that you know where you're going. So our students, they don't know anything else.
That's right. They have moved on, and well, they didn't move on. They grew up in that. So that's how they're used to consuming information. So it's a different world, and you either, the old saying is adapt or die. So you have to adapt or you're going to become extinct.
Well, so I'm thinking about other innovations that are coming along for the media, and one that's affecting education, I'm sure is affecting you, is artificial intelligence. That has become a central discussion for higher education these days, and I imagine the same for you.
Absolutely.
And so what do you think the future of journalism looks like, especially including the AI element?
Well, as far as AI, we've been fairly proactive with that. We've created within the Waco organization across all of our newspapers, we've created an AI task force made up of primarily editors, some digital editors, but primarily editors. And we're discussing the role that AI can play in journalism. Right now, as it sits today, we do not accept any AI, even to the extent of a letters to the editor. We run that through a screener. If it's come primarily AI, we don't run it. It's in our editorial policy. We don't currently use any AI. Now, that's not to say down the road we're looking at a lot of different options. There's always technology that's coming along that allows you to screen AI and not let AI use it as a learning tool and own your content. There's a lot of potential minefields in that realm that we are actively looking at, but as it sits today, our policy is zero AI in our journalism.
Well, that's good. If you consume any online journalism these days, sometimes it's hard.
It is.
It's getting harder
Yes.
to distinguish.
It is.
And just from an educational perspective, our issue is cheating, of course. People having an AI write a paper for faculty. So faculty are really struggling with it. It's just an ongoing conversation with us. And it's sort of that balance. I think actually I was interviewed in the paper once, and I talked about AI when it was first starting to come up. Many years back, we had a huge debate in higher ed about using calculators in math.
Yeah.
You know, a graphing calculator. No, students really need to know how to do this by hand.
Yeah.
But you have this tool that can do it faster, and they can learn more quicker. And now everybody just uses a calculator.
Exactly.
So when will we cross that threshold where AI becomes that tool? You still write in the paper, but maybe
It
AI is
will.
the
It will have a
assistant.
role. The issue our organization faces with it is accuracy and representation, because when we put out a story, I think this is something that maybe a lot of people that I talk to don't understand is, you read stories online, on social media or wherever. If we put out a story that's inaccurate, we're going to get sued. I mean,
Right.
that's just bottom line. So there's a little bit more at play. I guess that helps build the trust in our product, because we're not Facebook. We're not going to put out something that hasn't been checked, hasn't been verified. Now, that's not to say we don't make mistakes. We
Right.
spell names wrong, put street addresses in wrong. Those things happen, but we also print corrections. But as far as a blatant misrepresentation of the facts, we would be sued. So
Yeah.
I can tell you that's where AI gets scary for us. Because really, for it to be a functional tool, you're still going to have a human read every word of it. And so how effective is that? I don't know. We haven't found a solution. All we do currently is we just say we're not doing it right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting to see how things change.
It's coming fast. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's an amazing tool in the right hands, but like any tool, if it's in the wrong hands, it can be
You've got to
a
check
very
it.
dangerous tool.
My experience is that you have to check it, and you have to be knowledgeable enough to know
Right.
what's right or wrong with it.
Right.
And if you're not, then you run the risk of making a mistake.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm thinking, I was listening to a podcast, this professor talking about setting up a new class, and he decided to use AI just to, hey, create a syllabus on this with a reading list. And he created a reading list, and he was looking at the reading list, like, oh, yeah, that's a great book. Oh, I should have thought about including this. Hey, I know this author, but I don't know this article. What is this article? I've never seen this article. I'm going to look it up. It's not a real article.
That's right. It doesn't
It was
exist.
just a made-up article. The other two were fine. This one was just a
yeah.
made-up article that AI had
Yes.
put together. So you have to be knowledgeable
That's
enough
exactly right.
to know that it's making mistakes, which is the difficulty
Yes,
right now.
it
I'm
is.
sure.
It is a challenge for sure. But we are aware of it. That task force meets weekly, and they're discussing, tools and services we can buy that may allow us to use it more efficiently. But as of today, we don't use it.
Harry, I don't think I asked you, really, I asked about the background of the paper, but I didn't really ask about your background personally. How did you get started in the paper business and the journalism?
Well, 33 years ago, funny enough, I was selling cars in a little town called Osceola, Arkansas.
I know Osceola.
And one day the owners of the dealership came in and said, we're closing in a month. So I was like, okay, well, that's going to be interesting. So had a young family. So in panic mode, I was just sending resumes anywhere I could send them. So back in those days, you actually mailed resumes. So I had two versions. For the jobs I really wanted, I had a nice kind of off-white paper, pretty nice. And, had some extra purple paper sitting around the house, so I just used that, sent them out. So one day I get a call from the advertising director at the Jonesboro Sun to come over for an interview. So I come over, interview with him. He takes a couple of weeks, then he calls me. He hires me as an ad sales rep. So I forget how long I'd been there, but we were talking one day about why, because I had zero experience, none. I'd sold cars, but that was pretty much it. I had zero experience. I said, what led you to want to hire me? He said, your resume came in on some purple paper, and I just thought that was creative, and it's kind of made you stand apart. So the purple paper sent to a job to this day. I do not remember applying for a job at the Jonesboro Sun, but it must have been a job I didn't really want at the time because I sent it on purple paper. So I got that job, and I was at the Jonesboro Sun for 15 years. Then I got an opportunity to go be assistant general manager for some papers in Mississippi. Did that for a while. Then we moved to a paper in Maryville, Tennessee. Did that for a while. Then we moved to the Northeast. I was with some papers in Maryland and Delaware and Pennsylvania for a few years. And then an opportunity came to come back to Arkansas. Came back to Arkansas with an organization called Paxton Media. was a general manager for them for a few years, and then the opportunity came to join Waco and did that about 7 years ago, came to Hot Springs a little over 7 years ago. By far, without a doubt, without hesitation, the biggest blessing to me that's ever happened in my career. This organization it's just a different organization. I talk to my friends across the country, and, they lament, I've got to lay 15 people off today, new budget rounds. That's not our organization. We figure it out, and that's all credit to the Hussman family. They believe in journalism enough to give us the runway to figure it out. Right. So it is a true blessing. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I told my wife when we moved here, she'd moved all over the country with me. When we moved here, our daughter was 7. And I promised her then, I said, this is the last stop on the merry-go-round. We're here. We're going to be in Hot Springs. If the Hussman family will allow it, I'm going to finish out my career in Hot Springs.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a good community.
It is.
I appreciate the work you do there at the Sentinel-Record. We've benefited from quality coverage, not biased one way or the other. Just appears what the college is doing, and we appreciate that. It's always good. I've got no complaints, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that.
So what's coming up? What are y'all working on?
Well, something we're kind of excited about, and it's new for us. We've got to get it figured out. We're kind of learning as we go. We've created a content creation team at the Sentinel-Record, and we're going to put a lot of resources into our YouTube page. Oh. So anybody out there that's listening, we'd appreciate a follow on our YouTube page, the Sentinel-Record. But it's going to be a little different. It's going to be strictly content that is YouTube exclusive. We're not going to repackage Sentinel-Record digital content. We're creating unique content just for our YouTube page. And the reason we're doing that, the thinking behind that is you've got to meet people where they are.
Right.
Somebody 50 and up, they know the paper, they're well aware of it. I guess what the germ of the idea came to me one day. I was at a local retail store, and a young salesperson did a great job helping me and asked me where I worked, and I told him the Sentinel-Record, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's the newspaper." And he said, "There's a newspaper in Hot Springs?" I said, "Yeah, it's been here since 1877. He said, "I didn't even know that." And I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 23. So I was like, wow, we got some work to do in that age group. So we've hired a social media manager that's really taken our socials. We've got over 1,000 followers on TikTok, which I would have never thought we would have had.
Right.
We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, obviously, but we see a potential runway with YouTube and content that's a little different and packaged a little different and put together differently. We've got 2 videographers and 2 strict content creators on staff now that we'll see where it goes. It's going to be a kind of a trial by fire, but we're excited about it. We think it'll be something good for the community and good for us.
That's pretty cool. That's neat. I mean, I've got a 15-year-old. You've got a 15-year-old, right?
Yes.
I mean, if your 15-year-old is anything like mine, she's always on YouTube.
That's right. Yeah.
Even this morning at breakfast, she sits down at breakfast and pops her earphones in and pops her phone up. And I'm like, "What are you watching?" She's like, "I don't know. These people are playing a board game." I'm like, "What board game is it?" And so she starts telling me a little bit about the board game, which is how our conversations have to be these days.
Yes. I agree. And that's kind of what we think. Hopefully we can put ourselves in front of people and let them know that we're not the newspaper from 40 years ago, and we're just approaching things differently and just to see where it leads us.
Yeah. Okay, I have an off-the-wall question for you.
Okay.
I mean, the comics always important.
They are.
What's your favorite?
Well, I used to be, back when it was published, I used to be a huge Dilbert fan.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day. I guess today, Baby Blues probably would be mine.
I hear you.
Yeah. Funny, online, as far as total time of engagement, because we track everything,
right.
The number one thing on our website is our puzzle pages, our interactive puzzle pages. By far as number of minutes engaged is puzzle pages. So
I'm not surprised. I've spent a lot of time on those pages myself.
Yeah, a lot of people love those puzzles, and they're great and they're interactive. But that also kind of lets you know that people's interests vary, and they're not always wanting to get the hard, straight news. So you just got to meet the people where they are, and that's what we have got to figure out. And it's unique for our organization. We're the only organization in our company that's doing it. It's exciting. We're excited about it. We think if we do it right, and that's kind of the foundational, we have to do it right. If we do it right, we think our YouTube channel can be one of the largest in Garland County.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that's very innovative. I know just because I'm a fan of news. My background's history and political science, so I'm a news reader of all sorts. And as a fan of the history of newspapers in general, I know it's a changing market right now. So, Harry, I worked in the printing industry before I went into education.
Okay.
I was in New England in a print shop. We had printing machines that dated back to the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And I was there at that time, at the turn of the century, around 2000, when things are starting to go digital. And you could just see companies shutting down one after another. That industry was just shutting down, closing, emerging. And I know it's been hard for papers for the very reason. And printers had a hard time as papers shifted to digital.
That's exactly right. I guess this illustrates it probably to me, in my world, it illustrates it the best. I worked at several papers throughout the country, and when I worked there, they all had these big, nice, majestic buildings. And out of the 5 previous papers I worked at, not counting Hot Springs, but the 5 previous papers I worked at before Hot Springs, 4 of them sold their buildings and they're in strip malls now.
Right.
And they've gone from daily to weekly to non-existent, some of them. I say we're blessed to work at the Sentinel-Record, but I think Hot Springs, this may sound self-serving, but I do think Hot Springs is blessed to be able to have a newspaper of the caliber of the Sentinel-Record in today's times, because, trust me, they don't exist everywhere.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's a different world, and it's a challenging occupation from a lot of levels. Journalism is a calling, really. To be done correctly, it requires somebody who's very unique, that they can come to a subject, and even though they may have preconceived notions about it, they have to report it just straight down the middle. And that's tough. We have seen really in the last, and this kind of goes into your realm a little bit, in the last 5 to 10 years, when you can find a kid that's graduated with a journalism degree, a lot of times they want to put personal opinion in stories, and it's like, that's not what we do. We don't have a bias,
Right.
And I understand they view it as this is their way to change injustice. They see something wrong, they're going to report about it being wrong, and that's true to a certain extent, but it's a slippery slope when you start putting opinion in journalism. It can quickly get away from you and cause a lot of problems.
Same thing in education. Absolutely. You have to be very careful. You have to give people the facts and trust that they figure that out.
That's right.
It's hard. When I taught political science, we have a whole chapter on the media. One of the things I always talked about is you can't forget that the media in general is a for-profit industry.
That's right.
They have to sell ads. They have a demographic that they try to hit. And so you have to be able to sift through that and determine what is the news, especially with the 24-hour news cycle on TV. It's different for print media than TV media.
Those of us in the media know that we, being the collective we of media, we have done this to ourselves. A lot of it is, like you say, for chasing the dollar. You chase the dollar, you give up some integrity when you chase that dollar, to the extent that some organizations chase it. It's a vicious cycle from the standpoint of you put out stuff, people read it, then you put out more stuff that they want to read like that. And so if people didn't consume it, the media wouldn't put it out that way. But I personally feel, and I think the majority of the staff at the Sentinel-Record feel, we just have to do it differently than that. Now, listen, we do have analytics on every story we write, as far as how many people were engaged with it, how long they read it, did they read the entire thing. And it would be very easy for us to sit back and say, well, this type of story got a lot of more engagement, so we're going to do a ton of this type of story. That's just not how we look at it. But it is tough, especially when and I've been in these organizations where they're bottom line driven, make more money. I don't really care how you make the money, go make some money. It is tough. The media has caused as many of its own woes as the outside world has caused for the media. And that can be changed. It's going to take people of substance in powerful positions to make those changes.
It's not an easy thing. I mean, there was the fairness doctrine that went away. That changed the nature of media. And then the cable news 24-hour media cycle. That's right. Everything's breaking all the time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
There's never a time when you don't have breaking news. That's right. And now we have updates. Like every 5 minutes they're updating the story. And so there's no time to really filter what's the truth, what are we pushing out. It's hard. As a consumer, it's a story I'm engaged in. I'm following it.
Over the years that I've been in the business, the freedom of information laws have changed pretty dramatically. It is more difficult today to get information from certain organizations than it has ever been, just because the laws have changed as far as what we can get and how we can get it. And
That's interesting.
it is a challenge. We deal with it on a weekly basis as far as what can we get, how can we get it. And then there's expenses associated with if somebody doesn't provide you the information in the time limit they have, you have to get a lawyer involved.
Right.
It's not just, hey, guys, so then you've got attorney's fees to get the information, and you eventually get it. But sometimes it's like pulling teeth. It can be a struggle, and it can be something that pulls at the purse strings a little bit too, you know. There are lots of challenges, but I can tell you, I would never do anything else, couldn't think of doing anything else, wouldn't want to do anything else. I tell any new employee that I ever talk to, no 2 days are ever the same. There's no boredom. Today you may be talking to this person, tomorrow you're talking to somebody completely different. Today's set of problems are completely different from yesterday's. It is a magical business that when it's done right, it is a true thing of beauty.
Right.
But when it's done wrong, it can be catastrophic and can ruin lives. So it is a massive responsibility that journalists take on every day. And I have great admiration for journalists that do it right. I have my opinions about journalists that maybe don't do it the way I would do it, but I have a massive appreciation for journalists that do the job right.
Well, very good. Well, thank you, Harry, for taking time to speak with me today. And thanks to all of you for listening to Winging It. New episodes are released every month. Until next time, this is Dr. Wade Derden reminding you there is a place for all of you at National Park College.